don't seem to have an agenda yet today. Which leaves me a little perplexed, but okay. So I'm going to post here. And the notes are the meeting link, which is a fair request from Melba Lopez, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. All righty. So if people could add your name. Yeah, and actually sub-projects also include S2. Oh, gracious. What are we doing here? I'll make sure you get the correct acronym here.
S2C2F.
S2C2F. Okay. I'm going to learn that. S2C2F. Oh, and I'm glad you're here, Jay, because I think the status of it is a good thing to talk about.
Yep.
The status of salsa on the.
I'm sorry?
We lost you, Isaac. You started and then you kind of disappeared.
Is that any better?
I just heard you.
Okay. I was just saying that the status of salsa agenda item, that's going to be covered in identical form tomorrow in the salsa meeting. Do we want to do it here as well? Do we want to do it in both? That's normally one that we round up the sub-work groups in the salsa overall.
Well, the salsa is underneath this working group, right?
It
Or
is,
this,
but I'm just saying that specification, positioning, and tooling rolls up to the salsa working group, which is tomorrow morning. Salsa overall rounds up to the supply chain, which is today. Do we want to duplicate this salsa roundup here? Because we're going to be talking through specification, positioning, and tooling this time tomorrow.
yes, but if you don't talk about the three groups, then what are you going to talk about in terms of salsa? Right? It has to be a collective, and it's just unfortunate that this is before the salsa meeting, so there's not really a collection, but ultimately yeah, so we don't have to go
I
into
think a brief
detail.
summary here would be appropriate. And in particular, there's some changes that are in its March to 1.0. Salsa is intentionally narrowing the scope. So if nothing else, I think everybody should be aware of that.
Correct, right? So I suspect that I don't know if Josh is here or Mark Lodato is here, but from a specification perspective, right, project 1.0 is underway, right? Positioning, we're working on a blog, and tooling, I can't talk to tooling, but this is just a quick update of what we've been doing over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing to note for those of you who haven't been following salsa is, they're working to a 1.0 and have decided to focus just on the build processes and just defining levels 1 through 3 with 4 TBD. Tell me if I've missed something here.
That sounds right to me.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I still saw some source stuff there, but I think the primary focus just for the 1.0 is on the build.
Right.
On the build side, yeah.
Okay.
At least they're splitting them up into tracks. So
Right.
a build track and a source track, and I think the 1.0 is focused on building out the build track more than the source track.
Sure, let's complete. So let's move the other two agenda items down since we've started on salsa then, and we can come back to those.
Make the agenda what it actually is.
I'll build the agenda live as people just talk. Melba, can you talk to, since we have the update on spec, can you talk to the update on positioning?
Yeah, so I was out for 2 weeks because I was sick, and Bruno was on vacation. So we hadn't done anything until this past week, which we started continuing the dev blog for Salsa and what that means for developers. So there hasn't been a lot of progress since the last one.
But the dev blog is primarily going to be discussing what we just talked about, the changes undergoing to 1.0. Is that the basic focus?
Not quite. We're
Oh,
taking that into
okay.
consideration, but also we're finding discrepancies. So we're going to ultimately make sure that the 1.0 specification is nailed down. Like the wording and the requirements aren't one-to-one right now. And so we're noticing that as we're writing the blog.
So I presume you're working that back with Mark and team.
Yeah, we will.
Okay. I have not been tracking the tooling so much. So has anyone else?
So we didn't have a tooling meeting last week because folks are traveling to KubeCon. I think I'm not aware of any huge progress, but let me just pull up the thing to remind myself.
Yeah, if I recall, I think there was some discussion on how on the implications of Fresca and Guac and a couple of the other frameworks, that the implications of those on the tooling that gets developed and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure about the exact how far we got into specifics on respective tools, etc.
So I would suggest on that one, let's have, I'll note update pending from Michael, and we'll have him produce an update. I think given KubeCon, I'm not even sure how well attended tomorrow's overall salsa meeting is going to be and whether we'll get an update from Mike there.
Okay.
So the next item has my name on it, but really I wanted to kind of solicit thoughts from people in the group. One thing that has occurred to me is that we have the salsa positioning working group. I think that the bigger problem or the more pressing issue that we have at the moment is overall positioning in the supply chain integrity scope, which is kind of one click up altitude wise, because we now have salsa and S2C2F, both as frameworks for supply chain security in the same spot. And I don't think that we have a great story explaining to external folks who may have 5 minutes to spend thinking about this, how these things fit together, how they're different, how they're similar, what our intent is, how we expect them to evolve over time, how the two map into an overall problem space, how we think about that problem space. And I think there's an opportunity to take the salsa positioning subgroup and pull that up to supply chain integrity working group level. And so have that group, rather than focusing narrowly on how is SALSA positioned, it would be talking about how is OpenSSF solutions positioned in the problem space around supply chain integrity, which is work that I've not seen happening at the moment. Is like kind of for supply chain integrity overall, how should folks conceptualize this space? How should they understand SALSA and S2C2F and Fresca and Guac and other things? How do these things map into the problem space? And I think that we've got to, I think that this is made more pressing by the welcome addition of S2C2F into the supply chain integrity working group. That, you know, one thing I don't want folks, and we can't afford folks to have the impression of, is that, oh, OpenSSF, yeah, they've got two supply chain frameworks. One's from Microsoft, one's from Google. I'm not kind of sure how they fit together. They seem to be competing or whatever. And I know that we all have a sense of what does S2C2F do, what does SALSA do, where does one begin, where does the other end. I don't think that we're telling a good story about that externally at the moment, particularly for folks who don't have a lot of time to spend thinking about this. And so I just wanted to get this group's thoughts on, do we need to pull positioning up one click and think about positioning a little more broadly in scope? And I'll stop there. Melba, you've got something to say.
Yes, I think this was brought up in the last position, or the last integrity working group meeting before I got sick. Somebody mentioned it, and I remember thinking, "You're signing me up for more work." And Jay had mentioned, and I think this might be a better approach right now, is that maybe each of the ones have their own little mini positioning, and then they work together until it's big enough that we pull it up. If I remember, that's how the conversation went. I mean, I don't mind, but it's hard enough trying to get one blog out with the little group we have just for Salsa, let alone all of this other content. Obviously, we can make it work, but Jay, is that how you remembered the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I said as much during the and not to take away from this agenda item going into the next one, but I think there's a bridge between the two here. During our first SIG meeting, we said as much. You know, the two should be, dare I say separate but equal. But I also agreed with Isaac when he brought it up there about having the positioning meetings together. I think they both have their lanes, and I think the lanes should be talked about. I also said, and I said this in our meeting, Melba, that either should not speak in silo of the other. So there should be a bridge conversation as we do blog posts, as we evangelize, as we talk. I think that there's lane now for us to talk about, when we talk about what these respective frameworks don't do, we talk about what we're working on that does do it, right? As a caveat, right? So as a caveat item. And then when we talk about the other one, we do the same thing. And then if we do it correctly, we could bring these specifications out as a -1 and a -2 together as a total and complete supply chain security suite of frameworks. One's dealing with being an actual security framework, the other one dealing with being actual compliance requirements that need to be met, that can be met through meeting specific controls on either end, right? And I think that paints a more well-rounded and beautiful picture of supply chain security in terms of what Isaac is talking about. So I clearly see the separate nature of what we're doing, but then there should be an avenue like perhaps this positioning meeting that Isaac's talking about, to bring what we're working on individually together to make sure that we're on a similar message, one side and the other.
And Jay, I think, I mean, that describes exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not suggesting that, hey, these things should be the same thing or we should merge them. I think it'd be awesome if we can paint that picture of how they become parts of a greater thing over time. But I think that right now, I don't think that if you took 10 people from working group integrity meeting and said, describe to me how salsa and S2CTF, C2F share this space, I don't think that you'd have 10 consistent answers. I think you'd probably have 15 answers across 10 people. And I think that it's a problem that's new to the supply chain integrity working group in the last month, given that now we have salsa and we have S2C2F. And I think it's incumbent on us to like come up with that story and say, yes, they're separate, they're two different things, they speak to different concerns, but paint that picture for people.
Yes.
What do they look like? Like, I want to see like a map of the problem space, and then how these two different solutions kind of, you know, lay on that map in hopefully a non-overlapping, non-gap leaving way, and have a great coverage of the problem space. Or if they leave gaps today, we should paint a picture of how they evolve over time to cover the problem space.
Yes.
But I think that what I'm pointing to at the moment is we don't have a great venue for doing that work. Like, how do we reason about salsa and S2C2F as two things sharing a mapping into problem domain, even though they're you know, non-overlapping today?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. So if I can just kind of pile on further, these are good problems to have. First of all, we've got a whole bunch of people working related issues. You know, we just need to make these things more coordinated. Although I think, positioning has been looking at a lot of different things. I think we should prioritize, first of all, making it clear how salsa and I'm sorry, I'm still working on the new name, S2C2F, work together. Here's what I would propose. Trying to come up with one slide, multiple people working together. If it takes you more than one slide, it's too hard.
It's too hard.
And trust me, somebody's going to have to pull up that slide and present on it. So we may as well hand to them.
Yes.
Totally.
What we want them to say. And I'm sure we need the words and backup. So, but if we can come up with a one slide, and I'm sure we'll argue and throw them back, and that's good. That's good. We'll try to figure things out. But if we could make that a somewhat short-term objective, and maybe different people will come up with multiple slides as I go. But I would like the end result to be at least one of those. One slide, here it is. We all understand it, at least at a basic level.
And maybe a reasonable starting point would be, Melba draws that one slide independently, I draw it independently, Jade draws it independently, and we have a session where we each present our one slide, and then we, share what's in our heads and figure out the best synthesis of them. I don't know. It's not in a bake-off sense, but it's a sense of bringing all the best ideas and producing a synthesis of them. And so I'm less. Yeah, I think, David, I agree with what you said. I think we need a slide. I see a gap in terms of work being done. I don't think anyone has that on their list right now. And so my idea was, hey, we could pull salsa positioning up a click. I hear Melba saying, gosh, you just give me a whole ton of new scope, and we're grappling with the scope we already have. Maybe we start with, in this level, I mean, in the supply chain integrity working group, and maybe we can start with async, and we do it in Slack, given that this is now a monthly meeting and we want to keep some velocity. Maybe we can just share diagrams in Slack and work on it that way, and come back in a month in this forum and look at where we got to. But I do think it's important that we have a common conception and articulation internally about how these two things are adjacent and work together great, and don't overlap and don't leave gaps and all this kind of stuff, and have that internal picture that we can then begin to, as we write our blog posts, as we articulate what the OpenSSF is doing and the solutions it's generating, we should have a common language and a common way of talking about it.
Yeah, I think so Melba just asked, so Melba has this, and we can either use one or the other. There's two of them out there. There's one from John Meadows, but I think Melba created a nice end-to-end life cycle diagram too, that we could potentially, with a few alterations and a few different things added to it, we could overlay where salsa sits on that diagram, where S2C2F sits on that diagram, and then so David, one slide, yes, I'm just gonna say two. I'm gonna say we paint the picture with the first one, and then we tell them what the picture is saying on the second.
Sure.
right? So if we
Sure.
overlay where S2C2F is on it, and then put what salsa is on it, the next slide we speak to what everyone is looking at. Perfect.
Awesome.
So
I love it.
quick,
Okay,
Sorry,
so
Melba, I
who's,
interrupted you. Had your hand up.
I'm sorry.
oh, sorry. Yeah, quick thing. So I know I talked to Jay about this because Jay had this vision of, these two are perfect together, synergy. And I think we have it written down in the positioning to do a blog around this. And he was, if I remember correctly, Jay, he had content already that we could potentially alter. So that was one thing. But the other thing I had was around, if we do see an SCI positioning, would that be additional or would it truly be lifting up positioning? Like, I don't really care about that. That was me joking around because somebody else was signing me up for extra work. Right. But I don't care where it sits. It's still the same type of work. Right. And so do you envision it being an SCI positioning with the little positionings underneath, or just one positioning group overall under SCI instead of just salsa?
I mean, since I'll give my take on that first, since I proposed the agenda item. I mean, I was imagining pulling it up and substituting it in the first instance, because I think that the working group level conversation is more pressing. And given that we have limited bandwidth, limited, resources to commit to it, I would say between the two, I think that we have more of a gap right now around SCI positioning now that we have S2C2F in the fold. And I think that we've got blog posts coming from OpenSSF, from Microsoft about S2C2F, and I want to get ahead of, as S2C2F becomes, more prominent as part of the OpenSSF portfolio, as it becomes more of the conversation, as we have more people interested and more people showing up for the working group meetings. I want us to get ahead of all the inevitable questions about how should I think about these two together, or how should I think about them separately? And so I think my idea was to pull it up a click and rather than create another one, but just not because there isn't a need at the salsa level, but more because given our constrained resources and time and hours in the day and so on, I think the more pressing gap at the moment is at the SCI level.
Yeah, you know what? Dare I say, I was thinking more of a iterative approach to bringing them together in conversation, but nothing says that we can't start talking to them and positioning them, together. Like I said, that -1 and -2 there's -3 and -4. You got to understand. I'm considering these other ones that are out here in the wild too. The guacs, the one over in the CDF, the Fresca. Like they all have a role here. But ultimately, when I think about the two major ones, which is the S2C2F and salsa, the -1 and -2 specification wise, right, where they're both using the community specification license. So they're both headed in that direction. There's nothing that says they can't head in that direction together, be developed right alongside one another to provide that complete supply chain security framework and compliance requirements that everyone can use. The positioning of these two together is a lot, in my opinion, a lot easier and a better story than trying to continue to position them apart. Although positioning them apart towards positioning them together is an iterative approach that alleviates a lot of the confusion if we just sit there and hit people upside the head now after all of the posts and story that's being told around salsa, because salsa's ahead of the game in this area, right? So now if we just all of a sudden throw S2C2F in there, it's like, you don't give people a chance to breathe. But this way, everyone gets a chance to breathe, everyone gets a chance to have input, and now it's a better story later on. But nothing says that we can't do that though, right? We can hit them upside the head and just make them get along, right? Make them understand.
So I think, I mean, I totally hear you, Jay, and I definitely like I hear that, you know, in terms of like, do we want to just smush these things together and make them one thing? I don't think we do. I think that'll create,
No.
it'll stall the work and it'll create more confusion than it will solve for right now. I do think like this idea of having a diagram where we all stare at the thing and go, yeah, that totally matches my understanding of how they fit together or how they you know are adjacent in the same space. And then we can start telling that story as we blog about them, as we evangelize, as we advocate for them externally. And I think, you know, to your point about creating a dash one and dash two, you want these things to fit well enough together that someone says, but there's kind of a gap in between, and we need a dash 1.5 or whatever. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that these are MECE, these cover the space without gaps and without overlap.
Right.
And that's the work that we could begin to converge on with these diagrams.
Yes.
I don't want to like, again, I don't want to monopolize the meeting today with this item. I think that we've reached a great, immediate, reachable, viable next step in terms of these diagrams.
Isaac, before we go,
Yeah.
I want to hear a list of people who intend to try to make it by when. You know, basically,
That's great.
who
I
and
will-
when, because otherwise it's super easy to
I
move
will
on.
commit to creating a diagram and
Okay.
sharing it in the Slack. So
Melba,
by next
I
time we meet,
think this is
people
something
will have seen
Melba
it.
and I could take on. This is something because
Okay.
we're pretty close to it. We her and I are pretty close to it.
Okay, so what I heard was at least Isaac, Melba, and Jay will do this.
Well, yeah, we're real
Uh,
close to it.
Okay, Isaac, Melba, Jay. By when?
So I think it would be great to have something that we share in the Slack in the next 2 weeks, and then we can all talk, we can discuss there, and then gather in this forum in a month to close or, you know, figure out where are we, are there still open questions or discussion? I don't know, Jay, Melba, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, good to go with it. I mean, it actually works out. I mean, I'll be on vacation for half of November. I'll be at the member summit the second week of November. So 2 weeks sounds right because after that, my cycles it gets real small
I
cycles
hear
after
you,
that.
Jay. It's getting that time of year. Yeah.
But I think although it's only one slide, the thinking behind it will be
Two,
important.
David.
And
Two.
position.
There's two slides.
Two slides. All right, fine. I'm going to write that down. Jay, 2 slides. Fine. Although I have to admit, you know, one with a picture and one with text about it. In my head, that's one slide. It's a slide with the notes page. So, well, whatever works.
Fair enough. One slide, one and a half. Meet you in the middle.
Me too. I see when we work together, we're going to have this combined thing. Yeah.
And just to be clear, the diagram slide is going to be a diagram of the problem space, and we show where Salsa, where S2C2F fits. I think bonus points if you can work Guac and Fresca and the other things in the supply chain thing into that thing as well. Like I think it would be great to have a picture of the problem space overall rather than just narrowing to just Salsa, Fresca, Salsa, S2CTF.
Yeah, we could do that. As a matter of fact, I'd enjoy doing that because I do want to visualize what all that looks like, because I think there's room for all of these things in the same microcosm. So I'd be welcome to try that.
Awesome.
Sweet. Thanks all. Appreciate it, David, you bringing this to some convergence and clarity.
My thanks to everybody. Okay, S2C2F. You know, Jay, I don't know if everybody has the URL for that, so maybe we can, before we let you off the hook on that, if we can pitch for you for a link.
Oh yeah. Give me 1 second. Got here for that. And here we are. Copy. Paste this right in the chat. I paste it right in the chat here. So this is the link to the new repo.
Awesome. Right, I'm going to paste it in the notes to make it easier to find. Maybe. Okay. Jay, I think the expectation is, Jay, you're going to give us a brief status on S2C2F, which, I mean, whatever you want to say. Isaac, was that
Yes.
what you're?
So we had our first SIG meeting that happened. That was great. We finally got, and thanks to David for this, we finally got the calendar straightened out with subsequent meetings. So the meetings should be updated and proper. I'm still working on getting some admin rights for it so that it has meetings. Especially over the coming next couple of months, where people will be going on vacations and holidays, we may have to move a few meetings or cancel a few meetings, and we'll be able to work that out. But where we're at right now, we're stood up. We're looking at how we're being positioned as well. So like I said, Isaac brought this conversation up during that meeting as well. So we're working on what subsequent meetings actually look like there. We have made a few changes to the framework, per a couple of the issues that we had before on the old repo. So we brought those over to the new one. We made some changes there. We're still making sure that the repo itself looks proper. We've had conversations about whether or not, not even whether or not, but having this positioned correctly as a project underneath the LF for specification, which is why I brought that up earlier. So that's good stuff that's happening there. Also making sure that the other working groups who did want to be involved, so there was some confusion on meeting times. I fixed that. So we should have an almost bum rushed turnout at the next meeting, which I can't wait for, because there are a lot of interested parties in this, and as Isaac was alluding to before. But what that means is that, especially as we move this, in parallel with SALSA, the bridging of the two, that should mean a lot more traction and a lot more people involved in our respective SALSA meetings as well. Like for instance, positioning meeting gets a good 4 or 5 of us that attend those meetings every single time. That should jump up like crazy, right along with the specification meetings. I know Melba doesn't like that much. Too many people, too many people in the room does not create a situation where a lot of the good work that we're attempting to get done gets done. But nonetheless, done in the open, and if we can create environments where things are where things are evangelized, and most of that's all the better. But S2C2F is moving in that regard. So all I can say is come and be in those meetings and help us build it out the way it's supposed to be built out. Like Isaac said, alleviating the gaps. Yeah, that's it. That's it. What you got, Isaac?
I was just going to ask if you had specific, I don't know, thoughts or goals around adoption and what that looks like for S2C2F. Like who you think is, I don't know, who are the right segments to target with respect to adoption? What does that look like? How do you make it real in terms of getting it out there and having folks actually pick it up and use it?
Yeah. So we already have a few. So from the Microsoft viewpoint, we already have a few organizations that are interested in adopting it within their environment, especially from a consumption standpoint. So consumers of open source, consumers of packages towards their own respective builds, which speaks once again to its bridging with SALSA, because they're using the framework towards making more secure choices on how they consume packages towards their respective builds, but they're also interested in using SALSA to understand what kind of compliance requirements they need to have to meet the different SALSA levels per their respective builds, right? So that's the 1-2 punch. That's actually the kind of stuff that we talk about, right? And one of the things that came out of our positioning meeting yesterday when we were working on the blog was, what are some examples that we can use to identify what kind of issues or what kind of attacks can be caught, or what can we catch using salsa. And I said, well, what kind of examples do we have, right? But so we have organizations that are using one to consume and then using salsa on their respective builds. And we can talk to that picture. That's all the better. So to answer your question, Isaac, it really is about identifying those organizations that are consuming open source, making sure we get this in front of them. They should be in the room helping to develop this too, right? So that when they bring it back to their organizations, it meets their respective business requirements, which this is more tied closely to than salsa is. Salsa is really a compliance requirement around build, not so much identifying the nature of their business according to the bill, but the build in general, where when you're consuming open source towards building a package, you really are closer to the business need or what your business requirements are. And those people being in the room helping to develop this or understand this in terms of the different industries that are going to consume, what their respective businesses, what their respective business posture is, what their business requirements are, and of course their security posture is as it relates to that. I think David has his hand up next.
Yeah, and Isaac, after me too. So just a real quick note. Once salsa gets a little more, review and looking over and comparing it with, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing. Once S2C2F has had a little more review and look, and same for salsa, and we work out a little more about how these work together, one thing that I intend to do is rework the course, the fundamentals course. We literally now have thousands of people taking that course. We expect to have more. Modifying the section on basically supply chain and so on to specifically cite these, show they work together, show the top levels, cite the more detailed specs, so that people will be, and I think this will help adoption, both in terms of people will at least have the big picture of what they're doing and be aware of those specific specs, and then can go and get those for more details. So I think, so I mean, that's not the same as a particular organization adopting, but I think we can take multiple tacks to help people adopt these things as they mature. And Isaac, oops, your hand went down.
Wait,
Yeah, no,
I'm curious. Melba, I'm curious. What's the acronym for what's the Tango acronym? I'm just.
No. I'm just
They're looking for something to match salsa.
Yeah, so samba is a dance, tango is a dance. I'm just, trying to keep the dance theme.
That's
not
right.
the
It
chips.
doesn't have to be an acronym, Jay.
It doesn't have to be that. True,
No.
true,
Nope.
true. And I don't know how to dance the tango, but I got salsa though. I can dance salsa. We can do that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Isaac. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I guess, I mean, it's super early days. In terms of the organizations interested in adopting it, are those ones that are coming to the meeting, and do we? I guess what does this? I guess my question comes down to what does this look like in practice? I agree with everything you've said about getting it adopted and helping solve real problems in the real world. I think S2C2F has that potential. I guess my question is, what does it look like in practice to start advocating this, start marketing it? Are we going to stand up an S2C2F.dev website explaining it? Like, kind of, how do these pieces come together as we start to think about driving? I mean, first of all is awareness, and then following awareness, there's going to be people having feedback and opinions and thoughts about why they can't adopt it or why it doesn't quite meet their needs. And there's going to be, from awareness, it's going to be gathering feedback and input and iterating on the thing itself. And then there's going to be adoption. And do we have like I guess, a systematic approach to that?
Yeah. So that's desired. I think that also is what should get decided inside of the SIG. And then of course, once we get that umbrella positioning meeting, I don't know why we don't have a .dev that's just an sci.dev where we
Right.
talk about where we have tabs or where we have tabs for salsa and for S2C2F. And then there's one tab goes to salsa.dev, the other tab goes to S2C2F.dev, and then there's a tab that says, how do these work together? Right. So while I say yes to that, and that's desired by the SIG, I also say if we're talking in the same vein of building that total supply chain integrity, a supply chain security landscape that we're talking about, I don't see why we don't have one governing .dev and then have tabs for each one of these, and then a tab that speaks to how they work together, so that when it comes to adoption, like I said, I don't see one I don't see one adopted over the other. What I see is both adopted for two different reasons, right? Like they have two different reasons, but the reasoning behind them is a complete secure supply chain. So that's just my general thought. And of course, if an organization doesn't need one or the other, then they can adopt one or the other. But when we pitch them to organizations, it should be how complete of a infrastructure do you want, right? So
Yeah,
so
no,
so that's
I think it's a great idea. I mean, in terms of the SCI.dev, I think that, I mean, the top level organization of that thing should be problem oriented rather than solution oriented, because people are going to come to that site with an idea of what their problems are, and we should talk to them in
yes.
that language rather than talk to them in the language of Salsa and S2C2F, with which they're not familiar. But I think that
Right.
having an SCI.dev, and again, this comes back to the previous agenda item, that we should have a really clear map of the problem space that we can help people navigate around and understand where we have offerings that will help them with their problems.
Yes.
And so starting to articulate what we're doing in the language of problems rather than solutions is step one of that. And then having sci.dev be an explainer of, here's what the OpenSSF has to offer in this problem space. But I love that idea, and I'd love to explore that. And again, I guess that's this meeting is the right forum for that, being the overall umbrella meeting at SCI level. What would an SCI.dev look like? And maybe that'll come out of the diagrams that we're building.
Yes.
So I don't want this discussion to end without noting the next meeting is November 1. Obviously check time zone, but 3 p.m. Eastern time, U.S. Eastern time. If I got that wrong, let me know. I think we got rid of the other SSC meetings, unless you haven't updated your. But the calendars are updated on the OpenSSF side, but obviously if you've reloaded it in, you'll need to resync update.
Cool. And I think I heard you mention, David, that there's some work going on in the overall operations to allow some more of the decentralization around calendar management, which I think would be awesome, because as individual SIGs and working groups want to manage their own meeting schedule, it's a bit of a bottleneck at the moment.
Yeah, now I have not actually seriously tried it yet, but I know that calendars, I mean, cross-organizational calendars turn out to be a lot harder than people were expecting. So, let me know if you've heard this.
Unsolved problem in enterprise computing is shared calendaring.
Yes, let me know if you've heard this song before. So my understanding is that the LF actually has been developing its own, basically some tooling to help with this, and they're starting to deploy it out. So I have not actually used it myself. The theory between Brian and I was we were going to let other orgs be the guinea pigs first. But my understanding is that some oinking has already occurred. So the plan now is to just start slowly moving this. As I said, I actually haven't personally used it seriously yet. I will know. My understanding is that I guess they have a concept between public and private meetings. So for the public ones, we would encourage people to use their LFIDs, and that way we know who shows up because writing down your attendance on a doc is all nice, but it's really nice to be able to click and be able to show which organizations are showing up. That's particularly of importance because we need to be able to show later on that multiple organizations are participating. We don't want a single organization. I mean, we want multiple organizations to be involved. And if they're not involved in things, then we need to figure out what's going on. That said, you can just show up without putting in your LFIDs if that's important to you, or without if you don't even have one. So beyond that, I haven't used it in anger yet, but I think that is one of its capabilities. But I guess we're all going to find out together. But it can't be worse than what we got now. Oh, I think one of the other things is you actually accept calendar invites, which means you'll have a better idea on your personal calendars of which things you're going to, which for some of us can be really helpful. Okay. Sorry, I don't have more on that front, but I think more information is coming. Hopefully that's not like winter is coming. All right. Are we out of agenda?
I think
Isaac,
we are.
it's your meeting.
It's my meeting. Yes, that is. We are out of agenda, and I see Melbourne's kicked off a thread in the Slack to gather and do diagramming and so on, and we can continue the conversation there. But this was great, David. Thank you so much for your help guiding us and the note taking and everything. This was awesome. I think we've got some great next steps around the overall positioning for SCI, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're still in the early stages, but I think this is I can't wait.
Yeah, me too. I think we've got a great story to tell. That's the thing. I honestly think we've got a great story to tell, and that's what I want to see coming together. Because we've got some great stuff in the portfolio, and we just got to tell an equally compelling story around it.
I have vague ideas, but I'm a little I'm looking forward to telling that story once we figure out what it is.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David, Jay, Malba, everyone else. Appreciate you all. And I will see you down the line in another OpenSSF forum, no doubt.